Welcome, CaseMakers near and far. I'm Dr. Tiffany Manuel, and I'm the CEO and founder of The Case Made. One of the best things about the work that I do is that I get to travel the globe and I get to hear amazing people who are doing the kind of things in their communities that are just so awesome. And when I hear great case making, there's only one thing that comes to mind: fierce. That's the energy of this series, and that's why I've invited you in. So come on in, take a listen. This is Fierce Case Making. Oh, child, listen, y'all. Woo, you want to listen to this. I know I know you're going to say, Dr. T, every episode of Fierce Case Making is just better and better and better and better. This is one of those. This is one of those episodes where we get to hear from somebody talk about a part of the justice walk that we don't always have the opportunity to hear from. And so just listening to somebody talk about their walk, a different part of the justice journey, is so important. So you're going to hear on this episode Rebecca Cokley talk about what's happening in disability rights and what's happening in the disability movement. And you're going to hear her talk about things like, the message and the messenger. And sometimes the messenger is just as important as the message, right? You're going to hear her talk about all the advancements that we take for granted that we would not have were it not for folks in the disability movement making the case in the way that they have. Oh my gosh. Classic, classic, classic. Another episode of Fierce Case Making. Have at it, y'all. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining me today for our session of Fierce Case Making.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. T. It's awesome to be here.
Thank you. Well, listen, I'm going to jump right in. I want to just tell our guests kind of where I met you for the first time, kind of informally. I was at the Philanthropy Ohio conference, and I was just kind of listening to some of the sessions, but I was going to be on a panel later that day. And your panel came up and you just wowed. I'm the kind of person, like, I go to conferences all the time. I listen to folks talk of how they make the case for the stuff they're working on. And when I listened to you, I stopped. I was like, whoa, wait. What she's talking about right here, she is masterful at this. I must absolutely have her on the show. So that's the genesis. We're going to get into that in a second, but wow, I'm so inspired by your work and just excited that you're able to join us today.
Thank you so much. It's, like I said, it's wonderful to be here, and I'm always all about getting the message out.
That's right. Well, let's start off. So first of all, I just want to say you have been a tireless advocate for folks who are championing the rights for a whole range of folks, but especially in disability policy and disability rights. Talk to us a little bit about where the movement is right now in terms of those issues.
I would say that the disability rights movement is stronger than it's ever been before and more united than it's ever been before. And I think a lot of it has to do with philanthropy waking up and realizing that they needed to make tangible, meaningful investments in the disability rights movement, which it really hadn't before. And there's only so much that you can do in terms of movement building when all of your funding comes from the government. The government isn't going to fund you to protest them. Right. The government's not going to fund you to tell them that they're doing it wrong. And those priorities shift with every presidential or gubernatorial administration. And so the influx of philanthropic dollars has really allowed the community to be able to work in a way that it hasn't worked before, and to actually set the priorities and say, these are our priorities. And now we have the funding and the resources, even though there's not nearly enough yet, but to help us advance the goals that we're determining for ourselves.
Absolutely. I remember when I was working for one of the secretaries of Health and Human Services many, many moons ago. And, every time there would be a change in sort of Medicaid or Medicare policy or, any kind of policy that was going to negatively affect, the disabled community, it was very clear. We knew that we were going to be locked in and locked down because folks would come in, chain themselves to whatever. And we knew, we were like, yep, they're coming out. Because we knew that, this is a community that when you step in front of them and you're doing stuff that's not helpful, they're going to let you know. They're going to tell you about it, right?
They protested me when I was in the Obama administration. I remember going downstairs and having a lobby full of folks that I had known for 25 or 30 years, even at that point, since I was a baby activist, and being like, really, y'all? I'm with you.
That's right. That's
And they're like,
right.
we don't care. They're like, equal treatment for everybody. And I'm like, all right,
That's right.
all right, I see you.
That's right. And I remember, all the time having this like, moment where I was like, I'm in the building, but I kind of want to be out in the with
Oh,
them. But I'm in
absolutely.
the like, it's kind of like one of those double dutch moments. Like, am I in? Am I out? I want to be in, but I'm out. All that.
Well, and it's also to me like such a testament to the strength of the community. Like people look
Hmm.
at this community with a very paternalistic
Hmm.
lens. Like we
Hmm.
have to care for those people. Oh no, those people know what they're doing when they disconnect their like 2,000-pound wheelchair's
Hmm.
battery.
Hmm.
They know that your city does not have accessible paddy wagons.
That's
So
right.
what are they going to do? Like, how are they going to haul them off?
That's
I
right.
remember watching during the Affordable Care Act protests, a bunch of my mom's friends
Hmm.
get arrested, and like they're sitting me in text, they're like, "We're arrested. We're going off to jail." They're like, "Oops, DC doesn't have paddy wagons, so we're just like hanging out here until they figure out what they're going to do with all of us." And I think the community we also understand the power of using that weaponizing that
Yep.
paternalism,
Yep.
and understanding that like when the media looks at people throwing disabled people out of their wheelchairs,
Right.
like society's like, wait, how do I feel about this? Like they're
Right.
protesting, but at the same time they need to be care like we feel this like urge to care for people.
Hmm.
And so what does it mean when people that society deems as weak or unworthy
Hmm.
are actually physically really demonstrating their strength?
I love that. That to my mind, that's just a really good example of like turning a sort of dominant narrative on its head. And you're right, people have to sort of stop and try to make sense of that because what they're seeing doesn't line up with their own understanding of these issues. Like, wait, what is happening here, right? And so it gives us the opportunity to undermine, right, the very thing that people take for granted, which is an important part of case making, right? You want to do that all the time because it forces people to rethink their assumptions or the stuff they learn because it doesn't line up, right, with what they're seeing in the world.
Absolutely. I remember actually talking to Congressman Lewis, and I have my standard good trouble sign over my
Yep.
shoulder. And I remember talking to the congressman about how he would show up for disability protests all the time. And one of the things he said, he was like, Rebecca, I've sustained at least a dozen traumatic brain injuries being beaten by cops.
Hmm. Hmm.
And he's like, I am a proud member of this community,
Hmm.
and would openly identify in solidarity with a multitude of movements. But I remember always watching the report outs on who got arrested and be like, oh, JL was there, and people are like, Congressman Lewis stepped out of his normal space today, and he was like, no, this is my space.
Right.
you know
That's absolutely right. That's absolutely right. And it's one of the things that, and I would say one of the reasons why I sort of got into case making, and just have been a lifelong, I would say, subscriber to kind of what it takes to bring people forward is this very issue that so much of our civil rights agenda, right, so much of the, things that we've done, right, through whatever means, right, to try and make things better for folks have come as a result of literally physical violence or people putting their bodies kind of in the middle of business as usual to stop whatever it is that's happening. And that won't stop. I mean, we will continue to have to do that, but there are also ways to make the case in a stronger way. So maybe we won't have to do that so much and so often. Like I think about the civil rights movement overall. I work a lot in the housing space, and I say, part of the reason we got the Fair Housing Act was because of the death of Martin Luther King. Nobody's going to pass that until
Absolutely.
his assassination.
Absolutely.
And then they said, oh, we better do something. Okay, fair housing, like that, yeah. But we also want to be able to, as a nation, to make decisions about who we want to be without having to assassinate people, right?
Yeah.
Or having people chain themselves, right, to the desks, right, of the local whatever it is, to be able to say, you know what, there's a better way to do this. We all deserve a shot at success and a great life. We can do this, and let's talk about that. Yeah.
Absolutely. I think about how we wouldn't have gotten the ADA if it
Hmm.
wasn't for sort of the nexus of the Vietnam War,
Hmm.
HIV,
Hmm.
and the movement to deinstitutionalize
Hmm.
people with intellectual disabilities. Like
Yep.
those three circumstances where all of a sudden people like me were not kept in basements
Mm-hmm.
anymore. We're actually having the right to go to school. We're out there in society. We had this huge wave of folks come back from Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
with really like a war that was stigmatized for those soldiers in a way that was really harmful, and so many of them ended up homeless and without services. And at the same time, this emerging epidemic,
Mm-hmm.
predominantly affecting the LGBT community, and how all of those circumstances created the storm that then resulted really in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was
Yep.
also really in a lot of ways the last bipartisan piece
Mm.
of civil rights legislation.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And sometimes, my colleagues and I at the Case May, we often do what we call community listening sessions all over the country on various issues. Folks want us to come and talk with folks and try to get a better sense of how they can make the case in their communities around different things. And we always ask community members to think about the last time when something major happened where they made a huge leap forward, right? And something that felt important to them. And inevitably, it always starts with something, or sometimes, right, starts with something negative, the this that happened, the this that happened, whatever it is, right? There was a major fight, there was an issue with the police or whatever. And then out of that came, right, some, conciliatory legislation or a policy or whatever. And then I asked them to think about what would it look like, right, if we didn't have to have that be the predecessor to good stuff. Like what would that look like? And they're like, and it takes them a while to like sit in that, to like think about how we make those kind of adjustments, right? But that's a part of the process, right? To have people think about like, wow, what does it take to be able to do that? Yeah.
What would it look like if our democracy actually worked the way that it was supposed to work?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And if like the person who got the most votes was elected
Mm-hmm.
president. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
I think often about um, what it would have looked like had Hillary won,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or I mean, I was in college when Bush v. Gore was decided. I remember being a political science major and going to school
Mm-hmm.
every day and being like, "Do we have a president yet? We don't have a
Mm-hmm.
president yet." Like,
Yep.
I thought
Yep.
we know who won, but like, what's the deal here?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and as they always talk about, like riots being the language of the unheard,
Mm-hmm.
thinking about like what would it look like if we didn't have assassinations, if we didn't have to have
Mm-hmm.
uprisings.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think about time I spent with Ferguson activists where they told me, and it's the earworm that still stays with me all these years later, that they didn't believe in PTSD because P implied that there was a way to get to post,
Mm-hmm.
and that post was a luxury.
Yep.
And that at that point in time in Ferguson, they were constantly traumatized, stressed, and disordered,
Yep.
and really thinking about how, even in the conversation around case making and movement building,
Mm-hmm.
how people come to movements because of trauma.
Yep.
And at the same time, movements can be traumatizing.
Yep. That's right. That's right. So one of the things that I would say that I've been working on quite a bit, and I think you probably are in the same space, is having people think about what's come out of the last sort of major iteration of things that spurred people to some things that were better, right? There were some challenges, but coming out of the pandemic, right? At least in the health space, there was just a lot of good stuff that came out of that in terms of the way that communities came together to figure things out when things were in crisis. Like communities came together, even just in terms of the, providing the vaccine, right? There was always hullabaloo about who's going to take it and all that kind of stuff. But just the delivery of that, to have the healthcare system deliver that, 350 million doses in a span of a couple of weeks. People got really creative. I know where I live in Orlando, Florida, they lined up the convention center. You sort of drive, 4 lanes of traffic driving through the bottom of the convention center. You got there, you stuck your arm out the window. They gave you the vaccine. You kept on driving without even turning your car off. And the speed at which we were able to do that, or the speed at which we were able to get some of the surplus checks out, right, to people, right, or the speed at which we were able to get ARPA funds out, was like, wait a minute, government can work that fast. Wait a minute, healthcare can work that fast. Wait a minute, vaccines can be developed and delivered. Now, I don't want to, justify any of that, so people get into that conversation. But just the fact that we were able to do so much, neighbors helping neighbors, that they like, we were able to on a dime, right, literally transition from a whole lot of things that were once thought to be impossible to do the impossible. And now that that's over, the pandemic for the most part, right? The sort of hullabaloo is over. Folks are going back to business as usual. And so one of the things that we've been doing in the Case Mason, wait. Let's take all the energy, right, of the good things that happened. Now there were a lot of challenges. Don't no, let's not undermine what happened, what also happened that were challenging, but let's take the goodness of how we were working together differently and figure out what part of that do we want to keep and take into the next iteration of how we support people. So I'd love to hear you think about that, just in terms of, thinking about, disability policy and what's happened there. What came out of that was helpful, useful, that can be leveraged for the next iteration of how we bring people forward?
The first thing I would say is like us marginalized communities, we've always had to be innovative and
Right.
nimble and be creative in our thinking. I mean, I think about, the Black Panther Party starting early childhood breakfast
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
and early childhood education and ambulances and things like that today we take for granted. But because those systems did not exist, or if they existed, they were not accessible to certain parts of the community intentionally,
mm-hmm.
um, that it breeds a level of innovation out of necessity.
Yep.
I think telehealth was phenomenal, being
Mm-hmm,
able to talk to doctors online and have your
mm-hmm,
insurance cover it. Telemental health.
mm-hmm,
I think one of the things that I saw that I found really fascinating during the pandemic, was the openness with which people talked about mental illness. And,
yes.
I think part of it was, people who had existing mental illnesses saw it exacerbated during the pandemic,
Yep.
and people who may have entered it without one acquired one as a result of,
Yep.
the trauma of a pandemic, grief, feelings of isolation and loneliness, like watching just the world be completely off kilter.
Yep.
And the willingness with which people were able to talk about it
Mm-hmm,
online and in social spaces, because there was a common understanding that everybody was really going through it. I
mm-hmm.
think telework, what, like we always say, we're like, oh, it's so cute the able-bodied population discovered the Columbus telework. Like we've been talking about telework for 30 years and have been told that it wasn't reasonable. Oh, but there's a pandemic and suddenly rich white people need like rich white able-bodied people don't want to go to the office. Oh, there's this thing. It's called telework. And all of us are like, really, y'all? Like in the disability space, we're like, really? That's so cute. You just Columbus telework. And then as soon as it's over, oh no, everybody has a moral responsibility to get back to the office.
Right.
Excuse me?
Right.
There's no moral responsibility. There's like, you don't want to pay your rent.
Right.
Like the rent bill is due and you need bodies to fill these offices.
That's right.
And so, I think that's been something that's been really interesting. I mean, um, there was always more that could have been done.
Mm-hmm,
Like, I really felt like we missed out a big vaccination campaign
mm-hmm,
by not weaponizing grandchildren.
mm-hmm.
Like, your grandchildren want to see Nana or Pop Pop. Everybody wants to go to the holidays. Like, you can't, like, the number one cause of death of seniors is COVID.
Right.
Like, let your kids have all these ads with kids saying, I want to go see my grandma for Christmas. Like, get
Right.
your shot, get your shot, cousin Larry, who's like shady and not wanting to do it.
That's right.
But I think there was a lot, and I think there's a lot that, I mean, the child tax credit
Mm-hmm,
was massive.
mm-hmm.
Being able
Yes.
to it lifted like thousands of families out of poverty,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a good thing.
Yes.
And to watch the rollback of that, I think has been really disappointing. I
Mm-hmm,
think, you know, there's any number of other opportunities that where we can take learning from the last couple of years,
mm-hmm,
and apply it to work going forward. I mean, I think investing more in the care economy, and both in people that receive care and
mm-hmm.
people who provide that level of care.
Yep. Yep. Love it. Love it. Absolutely. I want to go back to something you said, um, when you were just talking about telehealth and how, there are certain kinds of things, just generally speaking, like there are certain things that, like, you know, folks may not see the benefit of until they need them, right? So if we're talking about one population, well, that's not really necessary. And then when they need them, all of a sudden, it's all the rage. One of the things that really struck me when I heard you speak at the Philanthropy Ohio conference was you were talking about this notion of all the things. You did an amazing rundown. I've never seen anybody do that like what you did on the stage, where you were just talking about all the things that have really been the benefit that everybody in society has benefited from, that really came out of us making accommodations for folks, right, in the disability space. And like, hello, and you said something like, "You're welcome." You're
Yeah, that's
welcome, right?
my Moana moment where I'm like, yeah, you're
Exactly.
welcome. Like you have that, like captioning, you're welcome. Like suitcases with four wheels, yeah, we gave you that. Like all of curb cuts, that's us. You know, elevators that talk to you when the doors open, tell you what floor you're on because you're too busy texting your boo. That's ours too. Like all the various, yeah. I mean, we live in a society where so much innovation has come out of
Hmm.
what we call curb cut technology, which is,
Hmm.
you know, you create something, you make the world more accessible for the people with disabilities, and then it's adopted by everyone else and mainstreamed as commonplace and frankly common sense.
That's right. That's right. And you were even talking about something, I think Walkman or something like that, or Walk People
Oh,
or whatever the thing.
the CD or
Mm-hmm.
the iPod was developed because Steve Jobs was obsessed with Wagner's Ring Cycle and did not like having to switch CDs in the middle of a 6 hour opera. And
Mm-hmm.
he was like, what could we do so I wouldn't have to like carry a CD binder with me? And it was like, well, we could digitize music. And I remember reading that and being like, yep, that's a disability thing.
And you're welcome.
You're welcome. All the things, you're
All
all
the
welcome.
things. All the things. I love that because one of the things in case making that is really central is helping people to see their stake in your success, right? Like, listen, folks, all of us benefit, right, from all the ways in which we are thinking about issues of equity, right? When we make sure that folks are taken care of, no matter what their state of need is, all of us get to benefit. And the more we keep saying that and pushing that out, it's like, oh, wait a minute, you're right. Yeah. Like, there's a
Absolutely.
huge residual impact here, folks. Yeah.
I was just talking to a friend recently that's doing work on reparations,
Hmm.
and we were talking about how do we be mindful in thinking about the design of reparations
Hmm.
in such a way that, particularly for African Americans who are on means tested benefits, like you
Hmm.
don't want to design a reparation system that then makes people lose their health care.
Right.
And so, what are the different ways that reparations or reparatory policy could look? And could it be elimination of like complete elimination of student debt?
Yep.
Could it be paying off somebody's mortgage?
Hmm.
Could it be getting somebody a wheelchair accessible van that they could be able to drive from and get
Hmm.
themselves to and fro? Like, what are the different ways that things could be designed under the auspices of accessibility? But
Hmm.
what could that mean for such a broader group of people if you actually become more flexible in your thinking than just thinking like there is only one way to do some sort of social policy?
Hmm. That's right. That's right. That's right. Even in terms of it, some of the work that we've done at the Case May, just looking at issues around racial segregation, and and there's been some additional work. I think the Urban Institute and the Metropolitan Group out of the Metropolitan Planning Council out of Chicago did this whole report a few years ago, which I thought was great. It was talking about the cost of segregation. They were saying, listen, it actually costs us money
It
to be so
does.
segregated. When you address these issues, there's all these residual benefits in terms of job, access, in terms of like addressing issues of loss of life and violence, all of that stuff, all of these social ills that we've talked about come way down in part because we've made the investment in something like making sure that we're not so racially divided, right? These artificial, right? So that in of itself just it's huge in terms of trying to make the case for this stuff because it addresses this sort of what I think of as this sort of zero sum conversation, which is ripe in all of our public policy conversations. So if we do something in the space of disability policy, well, that's for them, and what does that have to do with me? Well, actually, you're right. Half the innovations, or a good portion of the innovations that you get, right, are the result of us thinking broadly about, right, issues of equity in terms of what
Absolutely.
we need.
Absolutely. And the getting past, as you said, the zero sum game, or the idea that civil rights are special privileges
Right.
versus these are things that people have a fundamental right to, a right to a job with safe working conditions,
Mm-hmm.
a right to high quality levels of health insurance that allow them to make choices in their life without having it be determined by whether or not Medicaid says that you can have X number of hours of care that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And it does. I mean, it does benefit everyone. I mean, just like the conversation around the Affordable Care Act, and, people are like, I remember when Obamacare was a slur.
Mm-hmm.
Like when we were working in the administration, they're like, oh, that Obamacare. And then and the president was like, yeah, I do care. Obama cares. And if you have a pre-existing condition, you're now not stuck either staying in an abusive marriage because you're tied to that person for your health insurance, or staying in a job that doesn't pay you well or you hate because you know that if you leave, you're not going to get insured anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And we used to always talk about how that was one of the most important things since the ADA. And then even thinking more broadly, like, yeah, what does it mean for a woman who's in an abusive relationship, or someone who really hates their job and every day
Mm-hmm.
dreams of their office being burned down by the time they get there, to be
Mm-hmm.
able to be like, I don't have to stay here
Mm-hmm.
because I'm a cancer survivor and I'm afraid that I won't have insurance anywhere else.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Love that. Love that. And one of the things we often talk about in case making too is this issue of what do you reminding people of what they lose if we don't solve for this, right? And so in this area, I was think about that issue too. Reminding people it's not just that what you gain, right? Because we're solving it, but it's also what do you lose fundamentally if we never solve this issue? If we keep having right a democracy, a world, an economy, right, a housing market, etc., which doesn't meet people where they are, which doesn't give people a sense that they have a shot at success. So talk a little bit about that. What is it that we lose, right, if we don't pay attention to what this is?
Absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things that I think about a lot is what we call the marriage penalty in Medicaid. And
Mm-hmm.
what it says is that if you have over X amount of over $2,000 in your bank account and you're on social supplemental security income, SSI,
Mm-hmm.
um, you lose your health insurance.
Yeah.
And so I remember getting a call from a reporter who had met a family that were living in their car, and eligible. They were eligible for Section 8. They were getting ready to move into an apartment, but they just found out they were going to lose their health insurance because the dad got a promotion at work.
Mm-hmm.
And they had a daughter who had multiple disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, so we either don't take the housing and don't take the promotion and we keep our daughter's health insurance,
Mm-hmm.
or if we take the raise, the promotion, we're going to have to get divorced in order to maintain our kids' health care.
Mm-hmm.
And the reporter called me and was like, Cokley, this can't be real. Like, this cannot be a thing. And I was like, oh, yeah, no, it is. It's called the marriage penalty.
Mm-hmm.
um and the fact that this family, like, we sit there and let family values be like a phrase that's taken, just like sort of like the Southern strategy was under Nixon, and we've
Mm-hmm.
seen folks like Stacey Abrams reclaim it.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, no, it's a family values issue that the government is saying we're going to force you to get divorced
Mm-hmm.
and impact you economically and socially, impact your family,
Yep.
you know because we don't think you should be able to save money.
Yep.
And it's those sorts of things where, I think the case making work is so important. Like when you explain it to people and you're like, this is a family value. Do you think the government should tell you that you have to get divorced?
Mm-hmm.
Well, they are.
Mm-hmm.
And explaining that to people, particularly non-disabled people, and they get really pissed. And I was like, look, if your daughter gets cancer, are you ready to split your family up?
Right.
Well, we shouldn't have, like, why is the government meddling in my family? Well, you're right, they shouldn't be. And yet, I have friends that will never be able to get married,
Mm-hmm.
and have to maintain two different households versus living with the person they love, and getting married and having all the economic benefits of marriage, because the government doesn't feel like they deserve to get married because they're disabled, and that rather they deserve to be poor.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and I think at the core of what you're saying too is two things. One is what I call slow braining people, like pulling out that example and then asking if that makes sense, and they can't, like their brains can't make that make sense, and so they have to they're like, wait a minute, I can't make it make sense because it doesn't make sense to me, right? And when they do that, there's an opening to really have a different conversation with folks, which is huge. But the other thing that is implicit in what you're talking about is a value statement, right? You say you value. Okay, we got that. You value this thing called marriage and all. You want people to do that, the whole dance. Got it. Then here's what it takes to do that, right? To maintain the thing that you said that you want, right? And your values. And if you can't line those two things up, values don't work, and I can't make it make sense the way it is, you got an opportunity to pull people forward, right? In a different kind of conversation.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember a young man that used to work for me at the White House who got into Harvard with a full ride, and he used a wheelchair and had to have home care services. So he needed somebody to help him get dressed in the morning, to help make him food, to roll him over once at night so he wouldn't get bed sores.
Mm-hmm.
And he had to turn down the full ride to Harvard because Massachusetts at the time would only give him 4 hours of home care, and Illinois gave him 12.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, and I remember, talking to people and being like, well, why doesn't he just take the full ride? And I'm like, because he could die. Because all
Mm-hmm.
it takes is one bed sore,
Mm-hmm.
and, he's going to be in the hospital for months versus, and he's doing all right. He's working at a firm in Chicago. Is he doing as good as he would have done socially and economically with a full ride to Harvard and no law school debt? Absolutely not.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But these are the choices that folks with disabilities are forced to make in a country that like fundamentally wants to talk about poverty, uh, like in the terms of who's deserving and who's undeserving.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right. So talk to me a little bit about as you think about the future of what's possible. I like to ask people the question like, what are you most optimistic about when you think about what's possible, right, in this space? We're in a really, I would say, some would say a precarious moment. Things feel really kind of out of order on a number. They were already out of now they're out of order for most of Americans. Like before it was just for some of y'all, right? Now it's just for all of us, right? Or whatever it is, right? And so there's an inclination that people have to start sort of hunkering down and protecting what they have, right? Like, oh, this is getting really. Let me figure out how to protect the thing that I have versus us figuring out together like how we have needs, how we manage together, how we figure out to meet each other's needs, right? Um, so in that moment, like, what is the thing that makes you feel super optimistic that the future gets better from here, right? That there's an on ramp to something better, right, than where we are at the moment.
For me, it's always my kids. I
Mm.
have a 13-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old.
Mhm.
And we live in New Jersey. I never in my life imagined I would live in New Jersey. It was like, oh, someday I will live in the Garden State. I'm from California and I lived in DC for like 20 years.
Mhm.
And we live in a school district where my son decided one day he wanted to learn about the Tulsa massacre.
Mm.
And so he went to his English teacher. And his school is sort of like Hogwarts in that they have like houses, and his head of house is his English teacher. And so he went to Mr. Anderson and said, I want to learn about the Tulsa massacre. I've heard about it, but like, I want to learn about it.
Mhm.
And his teacher sent me a note and was like, hey, can we hop on the phone? And I was like, oh gosh, what is it? And he was like, kid came to school and said he wants to learn about Tulsa. And he's like, I have like basic resources, but he's like, I know you know everybody. Can you like put a call out for some curriculum on
Mhm.
Tulsa?
Mhm.
And so, and that was before Twitter was evil. And so I like hopped on Twitter and was like, hey folks, 13-year-old wants to learn about Tulsa and the teacher's looking for curriculum ideas. Who's got what? And like the Tulsa Education Project sent me
Mhm.
stuff. Angela Rye, the journalist,
Mhm.
Politico, general badass, dear friend of mine, like Angela
Mhm.
was like, oh, I wrote papers on this in college. Let me send you my papers. Like the amount of resources that we got was
Mhm.
amazing.
Mhm.
And I think about in this time where schools are so much under attack
Mhm.
and where like teachers aren't being able to teach the truth.
Mhm.
And that I have a kid who has seen some things
Mhm.
and like took it upon himself to like bring this idea to his teacher. And that he had a teacher that was like, yeah, let's do this. Let's take a beat and like teach about Tulsa next week.
Mhm.
Um, and that if that's possible in this school district, it's possible everywhere.
Mhm.
And I think about like what it meant to my son to be able to like, I mean, he always walks around with a little bit of swag, but like there was like a higher level of
Mhm.
swagger because he was like, "Oh, I brought this up. Like we're learning about this because like I brought it up."
Mhm.
Um, and for him to be able to own that and what it meant for him as like a young African American disabled kid
Mhm.
to be able to determine what his class learns because
Mhm.
he was curious. And I think as long as the kids stay curious, I think we'll be okay.
Mhm.
Like we have to support that curiosity and buttress it, but it gives me hope.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that you said that. And I would say I am in the same boat as the mom of two teenage boys. The thing that makes me most hopeful is them. Because
Yeah,
they just have a different way. They've grown up in a different time. The kind of arguments and discussions we're arguing about, they're like, oh mom, that is so like, you know, 21st or 20th century. Like we're so far beyond that. And their just mindset and understanding, like even just about things in the environment, like, oh no, we're just waiting for y'all to move out of the way so we can actually save the planet because y'all are messing it up and we're about to
that
fix
is
it.
that
Can you
is
just
so
move?
true. They're like, please just like take a seat, take a stadium full of. They're like, okay, Gen Xer, like the way we are about boomers. They're like, okay, Xer, sit down
Yep.
and let us handle it. No, I think that's so true. And I mean, if teenage boys have it together,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, it says a lot.
Mm-hmm. Which makes me think about how we might be totally a little bit off topic, but I just think how we might be able to best lean into kind of their opportunity and exercise of their case making skills. To some extent, they don't bother to sort of case make to me. And it's funny. My two boys, they are strong case makers. Sometimes they persuade me out of my. I'm like, wait a minute, what is happening here? You don't case make me, right? I'm case making you. But I think how do we unleash their capacity, right? To make the case for the world they know is possible, right? So they're not just kind of waiting around for all of us old fogies to die off and move on, but we're equipping them with the skills to be able to talk about disability policy, to talk about housing or healthcare, or equipping them with the skills to do that. To say, wait a minute, there's a better way to do this, and we actually know a lot. I think even in Jersey, one of the more recent things that I saw was, some of the young people lobbied right to get themselves positions on this on one of the I think it's in
Yeah,
Trenton. I have to think about I don't know
yeah, I
which
think it is
city
Trenton on the school board.
on the
Yeah,
school board. I'm like, you just go. Like, that's exactly right. Get yourselves on school board because the kinds of conversations y'all are going to be able to have about what you need as students, right? As folks directly impacted by those decisions, totally different, right, than what a lot of the adults in the room think you ought to have. So how do we unleash more of that capacity of these young people to do that thoughtfully?
I think we try to find like a show that we can watch together with our kids.
Mm-hmm.
I think like media has become so like individualized and
Mm-hmm.
personalized, and so like right
Mm-hmm.
now I know we're watching X-Men 97 like
Mm-hmm.
with our kids.
Mm-hmm.
And sort of dissecting the themes and our thoughts on the episodes. I
Mm-hmm.
think, before, I mean, we did Ted Lasso during the pandemic, and like I'm super snarky and jaded, and so like watching something so like hopeful and optimistic, like it took me longer than everyone else to sort of suspend my disbelief.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like, oh, okay, I get this now. And like my son got really into it, and I was like, okay, I will watch this because you care about it. And it was funny, my husband and I were talking about how growing up in the 80s, there really was like fireplace TV that everybody watched. Like we were talking about like all the miniseries that our parents were into were like, the original Shogun, Roots, Queen, the
Yep.
Thornbirds, where it was like, you can't watch anything else because mom and dad are watching it and we are all collectively watching
Watching.
it, and I think there's just so much media out there now
Mm-hmm.
that trying to find stuff where it's like, can I watch this with my kids? I think that's why the conversation around Bluey is so funny, where they're like, parents are getting a lot from Bluey. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, but it's even more saying that parents are watching TV with their kids.
Right.
And so I think like finding those things that you can watch together, finding those things that you can talk about, um having like my kids always laugh because I'm a political nerd, so like I always have the news on in the background.
Mm-hmm.
And my kids have gotten to the point having especially my son who grew up in the White House
Mm-hmm.
when I was working for President Obama, who will look on TV and see like, oh, Auntie Brittany Cooper's on. Like, what's the crunk feminist talking about today? Or Brittany Packnet's on, and like that's Auntie Brittany, and like her husband Reggie takes our family photos, and or like Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley,
Mm-hmm.
who they love, or Senator Warren, who they've known since they were itty bitty,
Mm-hmm.
both of whom like they're like, oh, that's my person. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
what's she saying? And I've like texted Ayanna and been like, AP, like the kids like sat and watched your speech today on like eliminating student debt, and they're like, yeah, maybe college will be free when we grow up because like AP worked on it.
Yeah.
And so for them, I think it's been really meaningful to have connections to a variety of different people. I mean, as a little person, I always feel like um, I have the disability thing down,
Mm-hmm.
but as a white woman raising
Mm-hmm.
African American kids, I'm like, there's stuff I don't know, and
Yep.
I'm not the right person to talk to them about it.
Yep.
But my responsibility is making sure that, my husband and my responsibility is making sure that, we have a plethora of strong Black men and women and folks around them as they grow up.
Mm-hmm.
My husband's always like, you make sure we got the disabled folks, I'll make sure we have the Black folks.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the responsibility that we have, so that they can A,
Yeah.
make those connections, and B, have people that they can ask those questions of.
Yep. Yep. I love that. I love that. I think, part of what I got out of what you talked about too was just also just the connection, right, that you're able to make, not just to the folks who they know are making policy and doing amazing things, but just to feel like they're part of a larger community of people who are rocking, right, in the right direction, right, who are trying to make the sort of run towards justice and are like saying, hey, listen, here's the way you ought to be going, right, and helping them to make those connections, which is so super important.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Tell me what's your go-to move? I think everybody has when they're strong case makers. Like you are a fierce case maker. I can imagine putting you in any room with anybody, and within a couple minutes you will have figured out, right, how to make the strongest possible case to that person about what we need in terms of this issue. What's your go-to move when you're in a room?
Doing a ton of research ahead of time. Like
Mm-hmm.
I always joke that my brain is like the serial killers map on the TV show, like with the pins and the pictures. And so it's like, if I'm going to go into a meeting with somebody, I want to know where they went to college. I want to know if they
Mm-hmm.
pledged
Mm-hmm.
or they were in the band.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know if they studied abroad.
Mm-hmm.
I want to know, I'll remember what shoes they wore,
Mm-hmm.
and hold that information, because I never know when it's going to be useful.
Yep.
Um, I remember meeting with somebody when I came to the Ford Foundation and was doing research on one of the participants in the March on Washington that doesn't get a lot of media attention, who was a little person who stands to the right of Dr. King during the I Have a Dream speech, but we don't see him in most media because the podium's taller than his head. And I remember talking to his family because he had passed away, to try to get some information. And I was like, well, when the Ford Foundation gave him his PhD grant for, at the time, $1,500 at the University of California, Santa Cruz, I was like, I'm a Santa Cruz alum and I now work at Ford.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, where did you dig that up?
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I was talking to Congressman Clyburn, and he was like, yeah, he got a Ford grant. And I was like, so I work for Ford. So I went in our database and was like, oh, he got a grant for $1,500 back in the 60s, because that's how much it cost to get a PhD. And it was to work on social work at UC Santa Cruz. And I was like, I'm a Santa Cruz alum. And that's something I always remind people. It's like, keep those little bits of information. It might be just a line on a resume.
Yeah.
But it's so important to people. I mean, my birthday is December 4th, which is Alpha Phi Alpha's Founders Day.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when I would interview people at the White House and I would see that they were an alpha, and I would be like, oh, you're an alpha. So what does it mean to you to be a man of valor?
Mm-hmm.
And they would like look at me and be like, wait, what? And I was like, my birthday's December 4th. Like, you're not ready to answer that question. Like who was on your line? or like, talking to the deltas and be like, oh, you came in your crimson and cream. I see you. Like, yes. Like three of my best friends are deltas. And people would look at me and be like, how do you know that? And I'm like, I'm President Obama's chief diversity officer. How would I be qualified for my job if I didn't understand the
Mm-hmm.
dynamics around the Divine Nine?
Mm-hmm. That's right.
You know. And I was like, yes, the president and the first lady are unaffiliated and will remain unaffiliated.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't do my job if I don't understand the dynamics in the community.
That's right.
Which is why my husband and I joke that, of course, the AKs are now taking over the world with Kamala Harris as their vice president. But like, it's that, like, you will never get penalized for knowing too much.
That's right. I love that. I love that. The absolute first principle of case making for us is always connecting to people's aspirations, and knowing a little bit about who they are says a lot about what their aspirations are. And that connection piece, right, is so important. And you just spoke masterfully to that. Like that, if people think that that's just interesting information. It's not just interesting information. It tells you about somebody's aspirations for who they are and who they want to be, and that allows you, right, to get them into a different kind of conversation than you could if you just were like, yeah, let me tell you about disability policy. Let me tell you about this new, SB, whatever it is, right, that's going to do X, Y, and Z. No, it's like, hey, I know that it's really important to you to have, right, whatever that is.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm so excited about this particular issue, because here's what it allows you to do as somebody who believes in this, right, or whatever it is, right?
I remember advising a group of people that were going to go meet with legislators um, on an ADA related bill,
Mm-hmm.
and the senator had a son who just recently came out of the closet and identified as gay,
Mm-hmm.
and the folks that were going in to meet with him were a whole bunch of straight cis old white dudes in wheelchairs,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, where's the LGBT members of your coalition?
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, well, this is a disability issue. I was like, the senator's son just self-identified as LGBT, as gay.
Mm-hmm.
You want to bring in some gay young people his son's age,
Mm-hmm.
so he can see his son's experience reflected in them and what it would mean if their son was disabled,
That's right.
to actually make the case on this. And I was like, y'all are not the case makers on this. And I think
Right.
that's also part of it, is like knowing when you're not the person to
Yes.
make the case and being willing to like
Yes.
step back and be like, my
Yes.
role here is not to be the one out front. My role is to be the supporter, the validator, the person that designs the slide deck, whatever
Right.
it is.
That's right.
Because I'm not the right person to deliver the message to this person
That's
or
right.
this group.
That's right. That is huge. The humility of that, right? Because you care more about the success of the movement, right? To be able to take a back step, or to take a back seat when this is not, right, this is not your moment, or this is not your ministry. This is not the one for
This is
you,
not your ministry.
right?
I am going to hold on to that. That is a gem right there. That needs to be a bumper sticker.
Like, this is not the one for you. Let somebody else, right, who's better positioned, step forward, because for all the reasons you just said, right, they're able to make the case in a different kind of way. And because at the end of the day, the goal is that we win, right? You got to keep moving the
Yeah.
movement forward. And I've got to tell you that there are lots of folks who don't have the humility that takes. And that can be very frustrating. So speak to that. I know a lot of the folks who watch this are always asking us about that very question. Like, how do you get the folks who like to step back to say, listen, there are other folks who could actually make a stronger case here. We're all rocking in the same direction. We're all going the same place, but have the humility even to volunteer and say, hey, listen, this is not the right. Speak
You know,
speak a little bit to that.
I mean, I think thinking about it really strategically and taking time to say, okay, like, what do we know about who our target is?
Mm-hmm.
What are the things that appeals to them?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the data we should be sure to include? Like, I know, for
Mm-hmm.
example, with my boss's favorite piece of disability data is that over 1/3 of GoFundMe's go towards an uninsured disability related expense. It gets him mad every time.
Mm-hmm.
Whoever delivers that message, I'm like, if you're going to go in and make a case to my boss, take that data point with you, slip it in somewhere, because he'll know that you're paying attention to the work, and he'll be like, yeah, that makes me really mad.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think it's really, I think for my friend Alex Tom, who does a lot of organizing in Asian progressive spaces, talks about the importance of acknowledging being a yelder, like a young elder.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think part of it's modeling and being
Mm-hmm.
able to be like, look, this is like, I'm not the right person
Mm-hmm.
to deliver this. Like, I don't have the relationship with the office. I don't have the relationship with with the corporation that we're talking to.
Yep.
I'm not a stockholder, or I don't have that card, or like I don't shop there. But who does?
Yep.
And so they can make that personal connection. I have the joy of sitting on the equity advisory board for Sephora. And there's a bunch of us that have tween daughters, as does the CEO of US operations. And we were talking we spent like 20 minutes on our last call, like talking about the obsession with Sephora that like tween girls have right now. And we're like, and some of it's good. And the CEO was very open to being like, and some of it's not good. And so how can we collectively like have this conversation, even though we are all impacted and thinking about what it means, like as we level this message up throughout the brand, like how do we not make it like the Abercrombie messaging of the 90s where it was like you have to be like sick skinny. Like no, like how can we actually talk about like the beauty of young girls and their brilliance and their boldness. And no, you don't need hyaluronic acid at 12.
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I do think it's really sitting there and thinking about like who delivers the message is as important as the message itself. And I think it's being able to say, okay, this go round, like I'm going to be the supporting voice, or I might be the person that has the privilege of getting us in the room.
Yep.
But I want like person A and person B. Like y'all are like person A, you're like laying out the agenda, and person B, you're the closer.
Yep.
And I'm here to be the fixer if I need to be the fixer, but like I have faith in y'all delivering what we want to deliver in this moment.
Absolutely. Love that. Love that. Love that. Well, listen, it is a pleasure to talk. I could literally talk to you for hours. I want to ask just my final question is always about the issue about kind of what's on your justice journey. Like at the CaseMate, we only work with folks who think of themselves as kind of being on the journey to justice in some way, shape, or form, that they are doing the yeoman's work to get us there in some way, shape, or form, and trying to bring others with them along the way on that journey to justice. And so when you think about like what's your justice journey, like what is the place that you want to take us, right? And when I say us, I'm talking about just humankind. Like how do we get to a more just place? What would you say is on your pathway to justice? What does that look like? What should we be looking to you for as a way to champion the work that you think gets us to justice?
I mean, I think for me the biggest thing right now is focusing on like how do we disconnect disability from poverty? Like if we can eliminate the subminimum wage, allow people to actually save money, shift small business grant making, because right now the SBA doesn't acknowledge disability as a marginalized group for grants. And so what does it mean for disabled entrepreneurs when you can't get an SBA loan? Yep. What would it mean if the disability experience was not exclusively an experience of poverty, and that people with disabilities could have the same level of freedom of choice as non-disabled people expect themselves to have?
Oh my gosh, that is so good. Rebecca, you did not disappoint. Oh,
this was so much fun, Dr. T.
Oh my
Anytime
gosh.
you want to have me back, we'll have to do this again.
Oh my gosh. Awesome. Well, I'm going to say just thank you again for joining me today. And you are just an absolute inspiration. That journey to justice, I'm all about it. I'm a champion with you. Let's do it.
We need all the help we can get. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thanks so much for joining me today. Every new conversation we have with a fierce casemaker gives me new energy for the road. And I hope that as you listened today, you felt the same way. I believe in casemakers everywhere. And if you don't quite see the fierce casemaker in you just yet, hold on, just trust. Work those principles so that you can bring new champions to your justice journey. And if this information inspired you, then please be sure to like, share, and subscribe so that you can be one of the first folks who knows when a new episode is dropped. And until next time, stay fierce.